to some extent, a place where people can learn together, because I think that actually is a very compelling way to bring Jews into the synagogue, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The second component of where we are now, and I want to just talk about the American context here, which is our world. We live in a completely different world than even I grew up in, and we live in a very different world than my parents and my grandparents grew up in. And I'm going to give you just 3 words that describe this world from my perspective and what's different about it. The first is it's a distracted world. The second is it's an individualized world. And the third is it's a polarized world. So what do I mean by that? Well, distracted, all you have to do is drive on any road in Westchester. I live in Mamaroneck. And when I drive my daughter to school, I have never seen worse driving than in the last 5 or 6 years. And I am convinced 100%, without sounding too much like a public service announcement here, I'm 100% convinced that that's texting and that's other electronic means of interference that are taking place around me. I've seen people do things with cars I would never, ever like to see again. And a lot of that is really based on the idea that you can be interrupted in almost anything you do anytime nowadays. It prevents us from concentrating, it prevents us from thinking, it prevents us from getting ourselves to a point where we can really focus on something in a way that I think is really problematic. I'll give you another quick example. I have students in my Talmud class. I was teaching until December. And in my Talmud class, I have students who are taking notes on laptops, okay? Or at least they tell me they're taking notes on laptops, okay? There is Wi-Fi in our building, something that I think is good overall, but sometimes has its challenges, shall we say. And I'll wander around the class. I'm a sort of active teacher. I move into lots of different positions, and I kind of check things out. And I think I'm not a bad teacher. People do mostly pay attention, and they seem to learn things by the end of the semester. But what I do find is it's very difficult to prevent yourself from looking at email, from looking up something online, from doing a little purchase on Amazon, that sort of thing. And I find actually that sometimes I want to tell my students to just close your computers and let's actually go back to the text and let's look at it together and let's kind of disconnect ourselves from all this. We live in a very distracted world, and it means that there are times we really miss the incredibly important relationships we can have, things that Martin Buber, for example, used to talk about, the idea of us really meeting other human beings. And synagogues actually have to become places where people meet each other and meet each other in a different way than they meet each other in other places. Not through texting, not through email, not through all that sort of stuff, but shutting that off. If you can come in on a Friday afternoon, and I try to do this, I'm very serious about this, on Friday afternoon from the time the sun is going down through Saturday night, I really don't answer email. And I do that because it's the only way that I can stop myself from being distracted and being plugged in a way that's almost harmful if you do it all the time. Now look, if there's an emergency, someone calls my cell phone, I'm going to respond to that. I'm a reasonable human being. But nonetheless, if there's a way you can actually sort of pull that Sabbath back for yourself and create something where you can actually relax, that is a very, very valuable thing. You don't always have to be so distracted, and I think this congregation can become, in a sense, a place of refuge from some of that constant barrage of information. Individualized, my second point on our world. Think about iTunes. Think about the fact that when most of us were growing up, some of us in this room were growing up, you had to buy the whole album. Remember that? So you'd buy the whole album because one of the songs was one that you wanted, or maybe you liked the artist. You could buy a 45, one of the small singles, but only if it was a very important song that everybody liked, right? So nowadays, nobody buys the whole album, right? Everybody gets exactly what they want and only that. And that's iTunes, and that's online purchases. You can personalize everything to the nth degree. And that means that actually people feel that it's got to be exactly the way they want it. There's not a lot of room to have anything a little bit different from exactly the way they want it. And that means, by the way, I think for congregations that there's got to be some thinking about how to do Judaism in ways that fit the personalized settings that people live in generally. I think sometimes congregations live in a way of saying, this is the way we've always done it. And I think that we've got to actually be a little more creative and innovative to say, here are some needs we haven't fully met yet. Here are some things we have to think about in terms of the way we respond to the actual individualized needs. Now, I also think that can go too far. There are things that people will ask for that really exceed the boundaries and shouldn't be considered. But I think that's one of the interesting tensions that congregations and schools all really have to deal with nowadays. Let me give you another example of individualization, which really leaks over into my next category, which is the question of polarization. So individualization here is also takes place in the news that we watch. Have you noticed that there are people who watch MSNBC religiously, and there are people who watch Fox News religiously, right? And they're not really good to put in the same room sometimes because they really disagree with one another to a very great extent. So the interesting question here is if everybody's individualizing and polarizing their news, for example, or the information they get, then it means actually you don't have as many other viewpoints that are being offered. Let me give you another example. How many people take Metro North every day into the city? There must be some people, right? So on Metro North, interestingly, I used to get the full paper, right? Which would crinkle and annoy your neighbors as you kind of ran in on the train. Now I have everything on a tablet. And what I've noticed about my reading habits is the form of the tablet actually defines what I choose to read, and I only read what I want to. Whereas when I was reading a big fat newspaper, I would turn page to page to page, and I would find an interesting article in a field I didn't care about, and all of a sudden it was interesting, and I'd learn more about something I never knew before. And that's interesting because it's saying to us that we're really telescoping in on certain characteristics and paying less attention to things we're not interested in or things we disagree with. So that's a challenge also in terms of education and learning that we have to think about as well within a synagogue setting. We should become places that actually expose people to new ideas, to ideas that are different than the kinds of things they think about normally. I want to also talk about the other side of our world, which is I actually am not a Luddite. I do like technology. I was an electrical engineer in college. I'm not afraid of computers. I think these things are good. But I want to think about the positive uses we can put technology to, and that's an important piece of our world, and I'll give you a few examples. I was on an aircraft carrier with the US Navy at one point, and on an aircraft carrier, they can't bring 5,000 prayer books. It's a little too heavy, and they have other heavy things to store on the aircraft carrier. So what did they do? They don't have any prayer books. They actually have an LCD screen where basically they project all the words up. And I'd never really been in a setting like this. This was about 8 or 10 years ago. And what I noticed was when everything was on the LCD screen, everybody looked up and sang together instead of looking down into their prayer books. It was a fascinating difference. And to play around with something like that, it's not right for everybody necessarily. It may not be right for every congregation. But there's some interesting unity that comes from the fact that you look at a screen together. I could also see, by the way, a tablet prayer book where every week you'd come in and the service would be a little different. And basically the rabbis, cantors, educators could decide that they would essentially make a new service each time, and you wouldn't have to buy one. You could just download it as you come into the sanctuary and pray along. By the way, that won't work in the Orthodox movement because you can't use electricity on Shabbos. But nonetheless, it's an interesting idea for us to think about. I'll give you a few other examples. In a congregation I visited in Philadelphia not long ago, there was an elderly grandparent who was too ill to come out of the hospital to go to his grandson's bar mitzvah. So what did they do? They took a laptop to his hospital room, they put it in the hospital room, and they sat him up, and they gave him an opportunity to have an aliyah at his grandson's bar mitzvah from the hospital room. Now, I feel a little weird about that, I have to tell you. But on the other hand, what an incredible mitzvah to be able to allow this ill man to participate in his grandson's bar mitzvah. It's forward-looking, it's fascinating. Again, I'm not sure I love it, but it's definitely something to think about. Another example. In this same congregation, 2 kids had grown up in the congregation, gotten married. They moved then out to Arizona. They couldn't afford to come home for a baby naming. So instead of going to a congregation they never knew, instead of going someplace that nobody knew them there, their grandparents of the child were all in this congregation in Philadelphia. They hooked up a Skype hookup onto an LCD screen in their sanctuary, and they named the baby from afar with their rabbi and their grandparents standing there. I feel a little weird about it, I have to tell you. But on the other hand, it's a fascinating new thing, and you should see how people communicate these days with Skype and with all sorts of other mechanisms. Why should we not be thinking about that with respect to Judaism? A last example of this. I have 2 students who created something called Project Zug. Zug in Hebrew means couple. What they do is they take an Israeli and they take an American, and they give them homework. They say, you are going to get together on Skype 1 time a week for a whole year, and you're going to talk about the following curriculum together in English and in Hebrew. And what's going to happen is you will have a relationship with somebody in Israel who's living there, and you will figure out what does it mean to be a diasporan Jew and to have a relationship with Israel, and what does it mean to be an Israeli Jew and to have a relationship with the diaspora. And it's free. Skype doesn't cost anything if you both download the software. So what's happened here with these two students just thought this up and got some money to put it together. These two students have actually made an enormous dent in the question of Israel, of Zionism, the relationship between Israel and North America, and it's a wonderful, extraordinary thing, and it's going to go global in the next couple of years, I promise you. That's an exciting possibility that did not exist in the prior world in which we lived, and now technology has really opened that up for us. Let me talk about my last area in terms of the current world, and then a few forward-looking things we can think about. To me, the most important thing that we have to do as Jews is we have to think about how to educate the next generation. Because the reality is, if you don't know very much about your tradition, then your tradition will not mean very much to you. What I have found, I grew up in a relatively assimilated home. By the time I got to 5th grade, I felt something was missing. I don't know what exactly happened, but I went and I knocked on the door of Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan, and I said to the cantor who answered the door, I said, "Hi, I would like to learn more about Judaism." And he looked at me with one of those, quizzical, patronizing looks and said, "That's very nice, little boy. Could I have your parents' phone number and maybe I can talk to them?" And I said, "Sure." So I gave him my parents' phone number. And from that point on, I didn't go to Lincoln Square. My parents said, "No, we like the Reform movement. We're going to send you somewhere else." So I went to Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. I grew up there. And from that point on, I've had this wonderful set of interactions with our tradition from people that were incredible rabbis trained by HUC who turned me into somebody who loves the Jewish tradition. What I worry about in this next generation is we have to make this exposure to our kids. We have to get them to understand how beautiful the Jewish tradition is, how the texts are meaningful, how the ideas are meaningful, how the ethics and the morals are meaningful. And we have to actually stand up and say, this is important to us. Because the reality is we're giving them a wonderful gift. And unfortunately, that gift sits unopened on a lot of kids' shelves for too many years. So what I'd like to see us start to do is to start to think about how specifically the Hebrew Union College can start to actually put Jewish education out there in a much stronger way in the future. And I'll give you just a few examples of what I mean here. Right now, we've got extraordinary programs, 5 major programs at our school. We have the rabbinical, the cantorial, the education program. We have the School of Graduate Studies, which are PhD programs, if you'd like to do a PhD in Jewish thought or ancient history or things like that. And we've also got what's called the School of Jewish Nonprofit Management. So we can train you, essentially, in any professional area if you'd like to become someone who works in the Jewish community. The interesting question for me is, I've got now campuses in New York, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, Jerusalem, but there are actually a lot of Jews out in other parts of the world. Not everyone actually lives in all these metro areas that we have presence in. So what we started to do in our education programs, for example, is we now have a hybrid program, where part of our program is done online on a regular basis with a cohort of people, and the other part is done through intensive week or 2 long retreats where people get together and study. And what we found is we've reached an entirely new market, a whole new set of people who would never have been able to study with us before. So my sense here is that there are a lot of interesting opportunities in getting beyond our physical presence and starting to think about how we expand our campuses virtually. We also have added now video rooms on all our campuses, which means that we can teach cross-campus. So in a sense, we've tripled our faculty by making sure that campus faculty on any of our campuses can now teach courses, required courses and electives onto any of our campuses. And it also means that folks in Jerusalem who teach for us can now teach to each of our campuses in the United States and back and forth. So that is an incredible step forward and a very exciting one. What I'd like to do going forward, and I'll give you just 2 or 3 last examples of what we're thinking about for the future, is I think that the college needs to take a stronger place as thought leaders within the Reform movement. I would love for committed lay people from congregations to be able to come study with us, to get together for a couple of day retreat, where you might have an opportunity to study with some of the greatest minds. Now, some of that could be done certainly online, some of that could be done in presence, but I think there are important issues we have to be thinking about. I'll give you an example. We should be thinking carefully about what it means to be connected to the state of Israel, the challenges that Israel faces, how the relationship is shifting as economic circumstances, as political and military circumstances are all changing pretty rapidly right now, as the whole neighborhood of the Middle East really shifts. We have a lot of interesting challenges, and the relationship between the United States and Israel has some real challenges to it right now. So why should we not have that conversation at Hebrew Union College? Why should we not think about how we can actually affect that conversation and influence that conversation over time? Another example is, why don't we think of questions that we would like to think about? And I'll give you another example of this. When you think about medical ethics, for example, so many interesting things are happening in medical ethics these days. What's the Jewish response to medical ethical questions? What are some of the Jewish responses to questions on the end of life, the beginning of life, abortion, etc.? There are a million great questions out there. If we could become a place that teaches that talks about that creates opportunities for conversation about that, I think it would make it a very exciting institution indeed. Finally, last thing I want to say, really, to conclude for this evening is something you may or may not realize. If you realize it, I'm sorry to repeat it. If you don't realize it, I hope it'll be something new and exciting for you, which is to say that you are one of about 900 congregations throughout North America. And the reality is that the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion exists primarily because of you. We're actually your institution. So someday when you feel like taking Metro North into the city, not for business purposes, come down to our campus at 1 West 4th Street. We're right near NYU. It's a great place. We've got a terrific, you can visit Norman Cohen, which is, that's pretty fun to do. I do that regularly. You can visit and you can see we've got a great museum, we've got a terrific library, you can actually come and sit in on cantorial recitals and hear people like Star Trumpeter. I remember your senior recital, by the way. You can hear people like Star Trumpeter actually share the wonderful work that they've done as seniors in the cantorial school. You can hear rabbinic senior sermons. It's really an exciting place to be, and there's a lot of terrific things happening. So I want you to think about us as your institution. Think about us as a place that is really an extension of this congregation and a place that really is part of you. And I also want to say to you, thank you, because one thing people don't often realize is that we are actually around because congregations, in the dues you pay to your congregation, a percentage of that goes to the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. So the fact that we have great scholars who are working on important questions, who teach in beautiful ways, the fact that we've got great library resources, the fact that we've got an archives in Cincinnati, which actually has the largest collection of American Judaica. If you grew up in a small town in the South, by the way, we probably have the bulletin from your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah that took place. We probably have that bulletin in our archives. We've got just an unbelievable collection. So I think what I'd like to conclude with is simply to say that we are an institution that is yours, and you're really part of it, and we want you to feel being part of that and know that this is a place you can always come. And here's one thing you can do to help us. When you see a great kid who is an extraordinary Torah reader, when you see a great kid who sings in the choir and is excited about it, when you see a confirmand who loves studying Jewish thought, and when you see a high school graduate who wants to find a great college with a terrific Hillel, say to them that they could have a role in the future of Jewish leadership. Pick them out, recruit them for us. I don't have a finder's fee that I can give you, unfortunately, but what I can give you is the fact that you will put them on the course to a really exciting life. You can put them on a course to doing things that are incredibly meaningful and helpful to the world, and you can actually, most importantly, help the Jewish community to really thrive in North America. And that is ultimately what we're all about, whether we're in a congregation, whether we're at HUC, or whether we're doing anything else within the community. So I thank you for all the partnership we've had together in the years past, and I look forward to many more years of partnership. And it's been really nice to come up to visit Northern Westchester. So thanks for having me. Have a good Shabbos. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Pankin, for sharing all those thoughts with us. What essentially you were telling us is that what is most important and critical is that we make connections with each other, with our young people, so that in some way we touch their lives. You were touched by rabbis at Stephen Wise Synagogue. I was touched by a wonderful teacher at an Orthodox synagogue when I was very young. Jake and Landon are celebrating a bar mitzvah tomorrow, and hopefully are touched by a rabbi, by a cantor. And when we do that, we bring them, hopefully, the importance of the text, of the tradition, of being part of this community of the people of Israel. And so it seems to me that the great challenge that you have as president of Hebrew Union College is to be training rabbis, cantors, educators, leaders who will touch people's lives. Who will touch people's lives in the way that Norman Cohn touches people's lives. Who will touch people's lives in a way that makes a difference and leads them to come to believe that the continuation of Jewish life is significant and important, not only in their lives, but for the future of our world. It is that sense of connection that is so critical. And it is that message, I think, that you bring to us tonight, that we need to bring to each other, and that certainly all of the students that you will train over the years need to bring into their rabbinate, their cantorate, their educational life, need to bring into whom they are as leaders in our community. So we thank you for being here. We thank you for connecting with us. And we thank you for inspiring us to remain connected with each other and connected with the future of this congregation and of Jewish life. A very important message that we should all take with us for our future. And now let us return to our service, to our prayer book. We continue on page 282. Page 282. Let us rise for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Page 285. Let the time not be distant, O God, when all shall turn to you in love, when corruption and evil shall give way to integrity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the mind, nor idolatry blind the eye. When we all created in your image become one in spirit and one in friendship, forever united in your service. Then shall your realm be established on earth, and the word of your prophet fulfilled. Adonai will reign forever and ever.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Page 293. Our thoughts now turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and of death. We dedicate this moment to the memory of our dearly beloved who have passed on to their eternal home. We think of them with love and with affection as we read aloud the names of those, the anniversary of whose death occurs this week. Phyllis Becker, Elaine Bleetstein, Charlotte Brotz, Rochelle Siren, Dorothy Cole, Herbert Davis, Michael Neil Degglesmith, Marjorie Gilbert, Rose Ginsburg, Coleman A. Goldberg, George Goldstein, Gabrielle Grunebaum, Ernest Heklinski, Lillian Lapatine, James Lewis, Eugene Myers, Mildred Resnick, Joseph M. Rittenberg, Robert Ross, Charles Ross, Lillian Russo, David Skolnick, Bert Struth, Henrietta Treitelman, Joseph Worth, Joseph Wolf. We add the names of those who have been taken from our midst, but not from our hearts in recent days: Phyllis Bellow, Caroline Levine Rogers, Renee Parks. May the beauty of their lives always abide among us as a living and a loving benediction. In honor to their memory and the memory of all our dearly beloved, let us now rise and join together in saying the Kaddish prayer, page 294. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divra irutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'mechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam alol me'el maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudishah b'richu, le'la min kol birchata v'shirata, tushvachata v'nechemata, damiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we all say, Amen. You may be seated. And now it's my pleasure to call upon the Vice President of our congregation, Rich Albert.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's really wonderful to see so many people here joining us tonight to worship. I want to wish a special hearty mazel tov to Landon and to Jacob and to the whole Cronin family and the whole Heibman family. We heard enough tonight to know that you're both going to do really well tomorrow, so keep up the good work. I'm confident that you're going to knock it out of the park tomorrow. And speaking of baseball, there's a lot going on at Temple Bethel right now, and one of those things is special to me, growing up as a Yankee fan. We have Ron Bloomberg from the Yankees in town this Sunday for a really special event. So we hope to see many of you there. Even Red Sox fans may attend. But there's a lot going on at Temple Bethel. Keep your eye on your service handout and your emails. There's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement and a lot of good things to do. So we have a talk by Rabbi Fuchs this Sunday, and next week we have our scholar in residence. So hope to see many of you there. I want to say especially thank you to Rabbi Pankin for those really inspiring and thoughtful words, and to Rabbi Fuchs, as always. We're always reminded how much you have meant to us here this year at Temple Bethel, and we thank you. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
will conclude our service with the singing of Adon Olam, and I know that the cantor is going to lead us through it in a way that is very exciting and challenging. So
Definitely.
please